Okay, think about this for a second. What if the most advanced, most powerful computer on Earth isn't some supercomputer in a lab full of silicon chips? What if it's you? In this explainer, we're going to dive into the incredible idea that our own bodies are running a kind of biological computation that honestly, artificial intelligence is only just beginning to wrap its head around. So, to get started, let's ask a really basic question. When you think of learning, what pops into your head? Probably your brain, right? Reading a book, solving a puzzle, that kind of thing. But what if I told you learning isn't just something that happens between your ears? What if it's happening constantly in every single cell of your body as a fundamental way to survive and adapt? To really unpack this, we're going to see how three completely different fields are all wrestling with the exact same challenge. How do complex systems, any complex system, learn from experience? So on one side, you have neurochemistry. It's looking at the brain's wetware, the actual molecules and chemicals that change when we learn something new. Then you've got artificial intelligence, which is all about building learning systems from scratch using code and algorithms. And finally, you have cybernetics, which is looking for the universal rules of feedback and control that apply to, well, both living things and machines. It's like three different languages, all trying to describe the very same idea. So let's do it. Let's put these fields right next to each other. Because when you compare how they approach the problem, this kind of universal blueprint for learning starts to take shape. Each one has a totally different focus. Neurochemistry, it's digging into the nitty-gritty of biology, how our neurons physically rewire themselves. AI is all about function. It's trying to build things that can learn without worrying too much about whether it looks exactly like a brain. And then cybernetics? It's kind of floating above it all, asking, what are the abstract rules of adaptation that work for any system, living or not? And how do they actually get it done? Well, in our brains, learning happens through something called synaptic plasticity, which literally means strengthening or weakening the connections between our neurons. In AI, you see a really similar process, where they adjust weights in a neural network to make it better at a task. Cybernetics looks at all of this and just sees one big, beautiful process: feedback and error correction, a constant loop of trying, seeing what happens, and adjusting. So the crucial point here is that they're all looking at the same mountain, just from different altitudes. Neurochemistry is on the ground with a microscope, looking at individual cells. AI is at the level of algorithms, maybe a few hundred feet up. And cybernetics, it's way up in orbit, looking down at the big, universal patterns of the whole system. But to find the deepest connection, the place where all these ideas click together, we need to zoom all the way in. It's time to meet the microscopic hero of our story, the biological receptor. Just think of a biological receptor as the cell's antenna, or maybe its own personal gatekeeper. It's this super specialized protein that just sits there, sensing the world outside the cell. Its job is to catch very specific messages, like a hormone or a neurotransmitter, and then translate that signal into an action plan for what needs to happen inside the cell. The process itself is so elegant, so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. First, a little signaling molecule, we call it a ligand, comes along and binds perfectly to the receptor. As soon as that happens, the receptor literally changes its shape, which activates it, and that activation kicks off a whole chain reaction inside the cell, passing the message along. It's the fundamental on switch for almost everything a cell does. And this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. There's a whole family of different receptors built for different jobs. You've got some, like ligand-gated ion channels, that are built for pure speed. They open and close in a flash. Then you've got others, like this huge family called G-protein-coupled receptors, or GPCRs, that are involved in pretty much everything from your sense of smell to your mood. Okay, so here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. These receptors, they aren't just static, dumb on-off switches. They are dynamic. They learn. They actually adapt their own responses based on their past experiences, just like our brains do. Receptors can show two totally opposite kinds of learning. First, there's habituation. This is when a repeated signal makes the cell respond less. Think about how you eventually just tune out the constant hum of a fan in your room. And then there's sensitization, which is the exact opposite. A repeated signal makes the cell respond more intensely, making it hyper alert to something important. Now, a huge part of this is something called desensitization. I mean, if a signal is just screaming at the cell over and over again, the cell needs a way to turn down the volume to avoid, completely burning out. Desensitization is that protective measure. It's the cell's way of saying, okay, I get the message. You can stop shouting now. And the cell has some really clever ways to do this. It can uncouple the receptor, which is basically like unplugging it from the wall so it can't send the signal anymore. It can also pull the receptor inside the cell through internalization, just taking it off the front lines completely. Or if it's a really persistent signal, it can take a more permanent step and just break the receptor down entirely through degradation. So let's just recap. We have a system that can sense its environment, change its own internal state, and adapt its response over time. Does that sound familiar? Because it absolutely should. We're about to see how the language we invented for artificial intelligence is the perfect language to describe the secret lives of our cells. So let me introduce you to a core concept from AI called the Markov Decision Process, or MDP. Don't worry, the name sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. It's just a mathematical way to model a decision maker, like a robot trying to navigate a maze, that has to make choices to get to a goal, even when the results of those choices aren't 100% predictable. And here it is. This is the big reveal. The language of MDPs maps almost perfectly onto the life of one of those biological receptors. The different states an AI can be in, for a receptor that's being active, inactive, or desensitized. The actions an AI can take, for the receptor that's binding to a ligand or the cell internalizing it. And the rewards the AI is trying to maximize. For a cell, the ultimate reward is getting the right response and maintaining that perfect internal balance we call homeostasis. It's a perfect match. As the source material puts it, these altered states produce many phenomena that AI attempts to emulate through its weighting algorithms. The takeaway here is just profound. Biology has been running these incredibly complex learning programs for billions of years. AI isn't really inventing learning from scratch. In a lot of ways, it's just rediscovering the very same principles that nature perfected at the molecular level. So, what does this all mean for how we understand intelligence itself? The implications are massive, and they really challenge our whole definition of what computation even is. I mean, the computational power packed into a single one of these receptors is just staggering. It's working on multiple layers at once. First, you've got the basic physics of the initial response. That's pharmacodynamics. On top of that, you have this whole AI-like decision tree of states and actions we just talked about. And then there's a third layer of actual chemical changes to the receptor itself. It's layers upon layers of computation. So the ultimate conclusion is this. Computation isn't just something that happens in silicon chips. It's not limited to a box on your desk. It is a fundamental property of biology. It's happening trillions of times a second in a massively parallel network inside every single one of us. Our cells are constantly sensing, processing, and learning from the world. And all of this leaves us with one final, fascinating question to chew on. If every one of our cells is a tiny, powerful computer constantly learning and adapting, what does that make us? Are we a single individual, or are we a walking, talking superorganism built from trillions of intelligent agents all working together? Something to think about.